One of the most exciting things with any new season of Death Battle is seeing what characters are going to show up. Sometimes even a match that you don't like might at least be saved by a character you like being in it, and then getting an analysis. Maybe even a good portrayal on the show, regardless of if it's not your preferred opponent. I am someone who is very open to new characters being on Death Battle, even if I personally don't know or care about them. It can be great to learn about characters I don't know, experience characters I've never watched or read, and just generally see how Death Battle handles certain characters. That said, I am not necessarily receptive to every combatant possible for Death Battle. There are plenty of characters I personally don't want on the show or don't think belong, and that's what this video is about, though I have to set a few ground rules so it doesn't get too repetitive. Rule 1. No characters who don't fight. That is to say, no characters like those from, sitcoms or slice of life shows where fighting isn't a thing. It'd be too easy to populate this list with characters who don't throw hands regardless of how important they are to any given series. Rule 2. No characters who I don't want because they're returners. It'd be really easy to just slap Batman on here and go, frankly, I don't want a 5th fucking episode with this cunt, but that's basically a different video idea. Rule 3. No religious figures. Admittedly, I kinda wish something as obvious as people religiously worship Christianity, Islam, Buddhism, Shintoism, Hinduism, and more, and such it is rather poor taste to go into versus analyze them and reduce them to their power sets. It's obviously not okay, and wasting time explaining it would not be fun. Rule 4. No real people. I think unless it's a case where it's like Jim Carrey or Weird Al Yankovic, where there's a character they play that is representative of themselves but with a heightened level of absurdism, or in Jim Carrey's case, just compositing all the roles they have played, or it's a joke battle that is not at the expense of any real people involved, real people shouldn't be used on Death Battle. And Rule 5, I'm going to try avoid characters that I just don't like, with one exception, because I thought I might as well include one. Otherwise, this list would mostly just be me complaining about not liking characters instead of why I don't want them on Death Battle. Okay, those are the rules. We good? Good, great, wonderful. To stress, this is all my opinion. If you disagree, that's perfectly fine. No worries. I'm not here to belittle anyone who wants these characters on Death Battle. I'm just saying, I don't want them. Let's get this show on the road. Here are my top 10 characters that I don't want on Death Battle. Number 10. Okay, so I have to confess, despite the name of the video, this one is not necessarily my opinion. No, for entry number 10, I have enlisted the help of a famous indie YouTuber Redrunner to talk about it. To share my opinion on it briefly, from my limited knowledge and understanding, I completely agree with this take and have not seen any argument against it in discussions that have convinced me. But to avoid fucking something up in the relaying of the information, I figure I'll just give him the stage and let him do his thing.
Hello everyone and everywhere, whoever was or will be, I am Redrunner in another person's video, and why am I here? Well, to talk about a character that I 100% do not want in Death Battle. And one character fits that bill more than any other that I could ever think of, that being Monica from Doki Doki Literature Club. I hear people talk about her more than I would like in the Versus-sphere. And I'm sure some people might be surprised to hear me call her out specifically, because among a certain group, people treat her like a fourth wall breaking, reality warping god in the context of her world. And that's where I take issue. First off, this will not surprise anyone to hear, she is an 18-year-old high schooler. She has no combat experience whatsoever, and she's not going to be throwing hands with anyone. Let's just get that out of the way. And that reality warping that everyone seems to hype her up on is kind of overrated. She herself, multiple and repeated times throughout Act 3, admits how bad she is at coding the game, manipulating the code of the game. She isn't even capable of changing the music in Act 3 without nearly breaking something. It's easy to look at what she did to the other girls in the game and say she has all this master manipulation, when not really. All of that is because of the character files she has access to. The character files which she herself points out are unusual. And even her just manipulating Sayori's emotions, making her depression worsen, and making her want to hang out, that chain of events almost damaged the game beyond repair. She was barely able to recover it. And frankly, it's unreasonable to say that if she were fighting another computerized character, there would just automatically be a character file for them. Nor would it have values to manipulate, like the obsessiveness or the depression, which means she, as an amateur coder, would be completely out of her depth and lost, leaving her with the only thing she can actually do: delete files, which she's also not good at. She herself is afraid of deleting herself if she deletes too much from the game. She could go nuclear, like in the bad ending for the game, and just delete everything, but I can't really picture that being an interesting interaction. What else is she supposed to do throughout the fight? Especially considering what I mentioned earlier, she's too afraid to do that under most circumstances. The only reason she does in-game is because she's at the end of her rope and has given up on everything. So deleting files one by one isn't something she would normally do. Some people could point to DDLC+, which implies that maybe she's able to possess people now. Except that isn't even actually defined. That's an assumption people make based on little tiny breadcrumb clues that doesn't feel very fair to use. So what exactly are you left with for Monica? A girl with no combat experience whatsoever, very rudimentary coding knowledge, and an awareness of the fact that there is an outside world. She just doesn't feel very compatible for verses. There's not much for her to do or for us to talk about. It feels like almost a disservice to the character to put her in verses, because there is no noteworthy part of her character that can be translated well into that medium, without overblowing it or misinterpreting it. But I hijacked enough of this video. Let's move back on to what Nemesis has to say.
Yeah, thanks man, that was a big help. Now for my opinion on things. Number 9. At 9th place we have the character I don't want because I just don't like him, placed here to just get him out of the way. A 9th place character is Cinderfall from Ruby. As someone with a very strong love-hate relationship with Ruby that's definitely more directed towards the love side, I'm not too terribly interested with the series on Death Battle. I want Ruby vs Maka, and I like Crow's options, with my favourite being Gordeau from Under Night in Birth, but I don't really care for most other characters being on the show. But one, however, is my all-time least favourite character in the series, and one of my least favourite characters of all time. I cannot fucking stand Cinderfall. I think she fails as a villain, she fails as a character, and she fails as an antagonistic force. As a character, Cinder is someone who just progressively got lamer and lamer as the series went on. Volume 1, she's this mysterious figure we see at the start and get teased about at the end of the volume, which is cool. Volume 2, she's this big mastermind and the main threat. Volume 3, she's still the big mastermind, but a lot of her weight is taken away when we learn that the whole time she was just someone else's pawn. When Volume 4 comes along, we learn that not only is she someone else's pawn, but she's just another in a group of multiple pawns, so she's not even special amongst them. Volume 5 has her nearly get killed by Jean fucking Arc, and features her prominently getting her ass handed to her in a fight. Volume 6 continues with her getting ratioed, and then barely features her otherwise. And then Volume 7 and 8 showcase Cinder succeeding by coasting on everyone else's success, and because everyone else is a fucking idiot. Neo really does all the heavy lifting for her, and in Volume 7 her 2 big attacks end with her getting fucking ratioed as well. As a villain, Cinder lacks any presence or threat. Despite wielding immense power, we've rarely seen her actually do anything with it. And in fact, our first showing of the power she has is Amber getting her ass handed to her by 3 people dogpiling her. Half the time her animation is goofy, her breathing fire out of her mouth will never not be really funny looking, and her voice acting. My god, is her voice acting just the absolute worst. Some of Cinder's line deliveries are among the worst I've ever heard in voice acting. It's not like Transformers Headmasters level of bad, but at least that's so bad it's actually hysterical. Cinder is just awful to listen to with half of her deliveries, trying to do a sultry, seductress voice that does not gel well with the way some lines should have been delivered. And as a character, it took 7 volumes to get any idea of her motivations beyond a drive for power, and even then we really didn't get anything more. We just got a backstory with the most heavy-handed and unsubtle song in the series, and then her mentor being some asshole who sees her in a state of emotional duress and decides to club her head in. Cinder is an awful character, an awful villain, and an awful antagonistic force. And unlike most other awful Ruby characters, she doesn't have fun quirks, interesting moments, or just a general feeling of I like seeing this character on screen. What else is there to say about Cinder? Honestly, not much. She's such a nothing character. She's impossible to take seriously, and she's so tryhard in the most pathetic way possible, and all of her accomplishments can be attributed to the successes of other characters. She beat down Beacon because of Watson Salem's planning, She survived Glinda because Roman flew away, she stuck in her Atlas because Neo could hide them, she outwitted Atlas because Wasp did all the work and had all the contacts, and she got all the relics because Neo got the first one and then led the charge to get the other. Cinder is useless. I despise this character immensely, can't wait for her to die in the show, really don't want her in Death Battle. Number 8. One of the things I like to see most on Death Battle is a character being portrayed just as cool as they are in their series, through the usage of direct showings and accomplishments. It's why I don't mind Marvel and DC episodes when they're inconsistent with how characters scale between episodes. Yes, Aquaman could have been scaled to wherever they place Wonder Woman, but at the same time it's way cooler to focus on this awesome thing that Aquaman did with his own bare hands. Sure, sometimes scaling can be made to be very impressive, but one character immediately comes to mind as the opposite of this. At number 8, we have the Fire Lord Ozai from Avatar: The Last Airbender. I really like the Fire Lord in his own series. The lack of appearance for 2/3 of it adds a lot of anticipation and build-up. You get to see how strong Zuko is in Book 1 and Azula in Book 2, but you're always left with this nagging feeling in the back of your head like, but the Fire Lord? Man, the Fire Lord shits on both of these guys, how ridiculous is he? By the time of Book 3, it seems like finally showing him in full would take away from the impact of his battle with Aang. But of course, you can't just not show him for the entire 3rd book, because that takes away a lot of the presence of being in the Fire Nation, and thus finally really seeing the character. So with the addition of Sozin's Comet, it adds that unknown factor back in again, while also letting Ozai shine a bit more and interact a bit more with other characters. Sure, now we know what Ozai is like normally, but that's just what everyone hopes they'll be fighting. Who knows what power he'll have when the Comet is overhead. And so his final battle with Aang is made incredibly daunting by the sheer power he's showing throughout. There is a problem though in translating this to verses, because as a result, Ozai has essentially no showings of power that can be talked about in Death Battle without the aid of Sozin's Comet, which pretty much puts a dampener on all of what he has done. Basically, any on-screen feat of his that isn't this very brief scuffle with Zuko is going to be forcibly given that very impact-destroying caveat of, but this is something he only did with Sozin's Comet. And it's going to be really problematic if none of his own feats, even when buffed, end up being as impressive as stuff like Toph's town level accomplishment. Because then if they actually calculate any of his feats and then caveat them with this is when he's buffed too, he'll end up looking really pathetic next to this is a child with no buffs who did this thing that's way more impressive. So they can either not calc any of his stuff and just fully rely on scaling, which is a lame way to do an episode, or they can calc his stuff while bringing up that it's when he's buffed and then rely on scaling to children, which is just going to make him look lame. I'm sure there's probably some middle ground that can make Ozai look cool and his analysis not be lame, but I just don't feel like that middle ground is one that'll be struck. From my point of view, everything that makes Ozai so great and imposing as a villain in his home series leaves him antithetical to Death Battle's format. I like the guy, but I'm not dying to see him on Death Battle anytime soon. Number 7. There aren't many full races that are often requests for Death Battle, and rarer do we actually get them on Death Battle. For the most part, cases like Yoshi tend to refer to one particular character as if there's only one Yoshi, or you get cases like specific Pokemon where they just sort of aggregate. Personally though, I'm not the biggest fan when they do this, and one creature in particular I really don't want to see this for. At number 7, it's going to be the Xenomorphs from Alien. And when I say this, I mean just generally Xenomorphs as a whole. Specific characters like Specimen 6 from the Aliens vs Predator video game or Grid from the Alien vs Predator film are perfectly fine. Hell, even the Praetorian cast Predalien from Alien vs Predator Requiem, as it's the only of its kind we've ever seen in the series. What I don't want is just a general aggregate overview of the Xenomorphs as a whole, because I feel like it's just not interesting. Or at least, it is too interesting, because a lot would have to be left out, and plenty of their appearances in film haven't even been Xenomorphs. It comes down to the question, what Xenomorph do you even use for an aggregate Xenomorph? The standard Xenomorph XX121? Even with them, there's so many casts that really cannot be combined into a single individual. With drones, we have alphas from Alien Bloodline that are very unique. The films alternate between domed, carved, and ridged variants. Stronger drones known as palatines are known to exist in multiple comics as well, and bio-drones from the Enemy of My Enemy novel. There are super regenerative drones known as Onslaught Genome Warriors that exist, and they even have acidic variants. Beyond drones, we even have Praetorians, which appear in tons of media across the franchise and have subclasses in Carriers and Ravagers. But then, these aren't even the peak of a Xenomorph's life cycle. The iconic drone, which most people would want to see, is basically the third weakest state in a Xenomorph's life after a chest burster and a facehugger, as they grow into Praetorians and then later into Queens. You might think, okay, let's just use a Queen then, ignore how that's far from the most iconic visual appearance of the Xenomorph. But then a standard Queen is still not the peak of a Xenomorph lifespan. That's just the basic model of a Queen cast. And yes, I know of the Royal Facehugger concept from Alien 3 establishing the Queens as separate as a thing to drones, but that's since been retconned in wider alien media so that any drone could potentially evolve into Praetorians and then mold further into a queen if they live long enough. But then the queen can evolve even further into the Empress, which is much stronger, and then further into the ultimate Xenomorph, the rarely seen Queen Mother. And even then, there's the even rarer seen King cast, so rare that some people question its canonicity. It's several stories taller than a queen, and the strongest Xenomorph period that we know of is it's basically a super queen built specifically for combat and not egg laying. And you can see the problem, right? How do we enforce the rule Death Battle uses of taking a character at their peak? Even with similarly problematic characters they've used, like the Yautja, it was fairly simple to determine what a peak Yautja is. Even though we rarely see them, a full-blown Yautja Spearmaster is the peak of the Yautja species. Sure, they didn't give the Spearmaster peak equipment like Phoenix armor, but the concept was there. The peak for a Xenomorph is not the one that most people would want to see, but rather a rare subspecies variant of an already rare to see individual. And limiting the Xenomorph to just the drone would be extremely lame, because you're basically feeding one of the weakest Xenomorph classes to an opponent, or saying their opponent is so weak and lame that they can't even beat a basic nobody unit. I also don't think putting Xenomorphs into an army battle makes it any better. Xenomorphs don't often come up with these complex tactics and strategies that make army battles cool, and most of the time we see them solitary anyway. And what really doesn't help is that we haven't seen a traditional Xenomorph in a film since 2007, with any film since only featuring the Deacon, the Neomorph, and the Praetomorph from Covenant and Alien Covenant. None of these are Xenomorphs, despite how close this one looks to one. And I'm sure plenty of people still think it'd be cool to have a Jobber Xenomorph against someone in Death Battle because they could do it like they did the Predator. However, to Predator fans, I feel like the problems with that is obvious. A ton of assumptions had to be made in that episode that really watered down the deep lore of the Yautja, and a lot was left out. The idea of different clans and their different equipment was ignored, and instead we got an aggregate of all clans that could never possibly exist. The purpose of the self-destruct sequence was ignored in favor of this Spearmaster using it like a bad blood, as self-destructs are only used defensively in extremely dire situations and never for one-on-one battle. Bad Bloods in fact go completely unmentioned in the episode, and despite giving this hypothetical Spearmaster access to every single clan's catalogue of weapons, their multiple armor options were completely ignored in favor of saying that nah, they barely cover themselves in armor. Every caste and clan of Yautja does that, yeah. As such, the analysis gives us a very watered down explanation that focuses almost entirely on what's versus relevant, instead of actually covering the species in its entirety properly. As such, likely a similar thing would happen with a Xenomorph, and that's just not something I want. I'm sure casual fans would love it, and that's fine of course, but as someone who has dedicated a lot of time and love to the Alien vs Predator dual franchises and their mixing canonicities and such, I really worry that an Alien episode is just going to end up massively generalizing a highly complex species, mixing things that cannot be mixed within canon and putting it all into a weak drone, or having that drone somehow evolve millions of times faster than it should into a queen or king during the animation. None of which appeal to me as a fan of the franchise. Number 6. So I wanted to avoid just dropping whole franchises and especially anything creepypasta related because it felt too easy. But there was one series that fell into a middle ground for me. At number 6 we have a bit of a generalization, the SCP Foundation. As a whole, I think there are very few anomalies and characters warranting Death Battle appearances. To be clear, I'm not saying there are none that could be on Death Battle. Some blatant ones like SCP-682 and the Scarlet King kind of fit just generally, and even some oddities like Dr. Clef I could see as totally being viable for Death Battle. But then I see a lot of SCP matchups floating around with objects that I personally don't see the appeal of having in Death Battle. A lot of SCP's creativity doesn't come from the stat lines and combat ability of the entries, but rather the creativity, intrigue, and mystery that they bring. There's obviously a few problems that everyone brings up that I would be amiss not to mention. Obviously, footage on screen is a problem. Now, we have seen them deal with this in multiple ways before. Most notable to me is Sauron from Middle-earth, who they got away with using a lot of artwork and stuff along with his very limited screen time. But even he has plenty of visual representation. A lot of SCPs primarily have walls of text and maybe 2 or 3 images at most. There is not a lot of media to go off of for visual representation in an analysis. Of course, they could use fan-made videos and credit them similar to what I'm doing for the purposes of this video, so that's possible. And there's also the issue of disparate canons, which frankly I don't necessarily think is a big deal. Death Battle often mixes canons and composites characters. If anything, this would arguably be more of a problem with how Death Battle generally operates, as opposed to a specific SCP problem. Characters like Leonardo, Optimus Prime, Static Shock, and Godzilla are all composites, so if Death Battle just combined canons with SCP, that'd be no less reasonable than the other times they've done it. My main issue is that I think SCP's appeal lies outside of the scope of versus analysis. Something like SCP-682, where its main focus is how strong and unkillable it is, sure, that's fine. But something like SCP-173, where its main focus is the horror aspect of being that you'd be killed if you blinked, less so. I also can't say I'm stoked with the animation potential brought, as most SCPs come in a few flavors. You have just a building, which obviously doesn't bring much, a rarely seen entity with one or two abilities usable in combat, or something that's basically just a static object that does something slightly odd. Although I'm not against SCP in Death Battle entirely, as there are some I think could work, SCP-076-2 or Abel vs. Kane from WWE, I think it would be really cool if it played into the unfictional nature of both SCP and WWE, and had Wiz and Boomstick talking about the two not as fictional characters, but as if they were real people within the world and the hosts were talking about them like this was a documentary. Scarlet King vs. Zolgo would be interesting if it talked about them as if they were actually old mythological deities from the real world that have since been forgotten to time, and with Zolgo if they primarily stuck to Fear mythos, which is basically just creepypasta's SCP foundation. But a lot of SCPs just don't work for me, even ones with matchups that I kinda vibe with. SCP-049 is one of my favorites, and I really thematically like him versus either a Slepius from Fate or Herbert West from Lovecraft, but I don't think either are a good fit for Death Battle, because of SCP-049 himself. But hey, people can like what they want obviously. If you want to support SCP-096 vs. Juggernaut, just go ahead, I don't care. Number 5. Mythological matchups. People want more of them. There are some big ones and there are some minor ones, but a lot of them prove one thing. Most people do not read or really know what they're talking about. And it's really sad seeing people want matchups for characters who really have nothing going on. And I think the biggest one to me, or one of them, has to be our number 5th spot, Fafnir from the Volsunga Saga and related texts. Fafnir is frankly extremely boring and offers nothing for verses. He's not the only mythological character like that. People also want episodes with Chernobog and Anubis, both of which similarly have basically nothing going on and never do shit. In Chernobog's case, it's because most of his stuff about him's lost. The story of Fafnir basically goes like this. First he's a dwarf, then he takes a cursed hoard and covets it for too long, killing his dad in the process. Sometime later, the hero Sigurd digs a hole while Fafnir is out drinking water. Fafnir has become a dragon now. On the way back to his home, Fafnir is stabbed in the heart by Sigurd when he goes over the hole, and then says some shit to Sigurd and dies. And that's it. That's Fafnir's whole story. Despite being such a famous name and one of the most well-known named dragons of all time, if not the most well-known at least in mythology, he does not do much. He kills his dad as a dwarf, hides away, wears a helmet that scares animals, and he produces poison from his body that can be avoided by just ducking. He's massive, we know that, but we don't even know what he looks like. Most commonly, he's not even depicted as what you probably think of when you think Fafnir. He's depicted as a long serpentine creature without wings and just tiny legs. So if you're imagining Fafnir like this, you know, this is more accurate. He also doesn't breathe fire. Like, I read the Volsunga Saga, he doesn't breathe fire in it or in any related text, he just produces poison and scares animals away. So he really doesn't bring anything to the table. He does nothing, he never fights, and his story can be summed up in one sentence without missing any terribly important details. What could an analysis of Fafnir even be? Most of it would be the story of Loki killing his brother, fighting with some gold, and then him taking it. And then as a dragon, what he did was have a drink shake the area by walking, fart poison, and die. He can probably talk to birds too, I guess. In fact, it's hard to make this segment longer, because that's I don't think I need to explain any further. He may be the most famous dragon, but he doesn't do anything, and would offer nothing to Death Battle. Number 4. YuGiOh, a series people question the usability of on Death Battle, but it really isn't as hard to work as most people think. Yugi, Bakura, Marek, Jaden, and lots of other characters have mystical abilities to make their monsters physically present, and characters like Kaiba really only need to fight someone in cyberspace to get access to monsters outside of Obelisk, which makes sense for Kaiba because he owns many methods of entering cyberspace. But there is one particularly popular character, one of the greatest in the whole series, who has no way to fight anyone. Our 4th place is Joey Wheeler from YuGiOh. Look, Joey is great, but he has no way to fight an opponent. So let's look at the ways in which YuGiOh Duel Monsters characters can get into a battle with real monsters and see whether Joey has any of these. And this is just Duel Monsters, that era that Joey's in. Number 1, Shadow Games. Characters with Millennium items can summon real physical monsters through Shadow Games or even out of them. Bakura has done out of battle, for instance. Within the Shadow Game, anyone can summon a monster. For instance, during the Dark RPG, which was also caused by Bakura, Joey is able to summon real monsters. However, Joey has no Millennium item or mystical abilities that could allow him to create a Shadow Game in the first place. Number 2, Cyberspace. Characters within cyberspace can summon monsters that physically affect each other in the real world. However, the only characters who have access to cyberspace are the Kaiba family and the Big Five. Joey doesn't have the ability to just go into cyberspace at will. He's a broke Brooklyn man from Japan who's still a school student. Number 3. Seal of Orichalcos. I guess technically you could argue this is a kind of Shadow game, but it's a different origin. Battles that use the Seal of Orichalcos have real monsters summoned. This includes Joey's battles against the likes of Mai and Rex Raptor in this arc. However, Joey doesn't have that card. Number 4. Certain monsters. Certain monsters have the ability to summon themselves in the real world. These monsters are, well, within Duel Monsters, just the Egyptian god cards. However, this might shock you, Joey does not have Obelisk the Tormentor, Slifer the Sky Dragon, or the Winged Dragon of Ra. He also doesn't have the Leviathan, who potentially also has this ability. What I guess he does have is the Claw of Hermos, which seems to be able to summon Legendary Knight Hermos into the physical world at the end of that arc. But at the same time, Joey doesn't have the card that makes the Claw and the Eye and the Fangs summon the Legendary Knights. Along with that, he doesn't even have the Claw of Hermos anymore. And the only thing Hermos ever did in the real world was instantly die, so yeah, that's not gonna work. Those are the 4 options to summon real monsters within Yu-Gi-Oh! Duel Monsters, and as you can see, he doesn't really have any of them except maybe the Claw of Hermos, which even then is kinda useless because he's never done anything in the real world. So the question now is, what exactly is Joey supposed to do in a versus battle? Yeah, it really goes as far as that. Joey cannot summon real monsters. In a versus fight, Joey is just a guy with holograms, and that just does not sound very interesting at all. And no, you can't just say the monsters are real for no reason, because how would you scale them? You couldn't scale them, because they've never fought anything in the real world, so they'd have no scaling. Number 3. Some characters are perfectly viable for versus physically, with feats, arsenals, and abilities. But just because that's the case doesn't necessarily mean they should be in versus. Case in point, number 3, the Iron Giant. The Iron Giant is a very well-beloved film based from a book. Anyone who has seen the movie should be aware of 2 things. 1. The Iron Giant is perfectly capable of throwing hands and beating ass. He has feats, he has abilities, and a huge arsenal. Number 2, the whole point of the Iron Giant is that despite that, he's not a gun. He isn't that guy with all the weapons and attacks who destroys all the things. He chooses not to be that. That is the antithesis of who he is inside and what he wants to be. To focus on primarily that element as the subject of an episode, because no matter how you sugarcoat it, at the end of the day, the focus of a death battle is just on the combat abilities of the combatants, feels like it is antithetical to the point of the film, the character, and the book. And this is where we go into, I guess, darker subject matter. The film was directed by Brad Bird, who at the time had recently lost his sister Susan after she was shot to death by her estranged husband. It was during Brad's research of this film's source material that he learnt the original 1968 novel, The Iron Man, written by Ted Hughes, was made by Hughes as a means of comforting his children after his wife Sylvia Plath committed suicide. It was because of these 2 events that Brad Bird pushed the film under the basis of what if a gun had a soul and didn't want to be a gun. The very point of the film is that the Iron Giant is not a character of whom we should be focusing on the combat abilities of, because that's not what he wants to be known for. That's against the whole point of the movie. He doesn't see himself and chooses not to be a war machine. He wants to be something else. To, in essence, take this character and decide to focus on the gun part over the soul part, which is what will be done regardless of how it's written, goes completely against the point of the character and the reason this film was even made. And I know there will be people arguing, well, if they focus on his soul and make that the big deal, then it's fine. But the problem there is that even if they do, even if most of the analysis is about his soul and who he is, the main focus of the episode overall is not that. The point of the episode is not about the Iron Giant's soul, it's whether the Iron Giant is a better gun than his opponent. The soul is irrelevant to the subject matter. One of Death Battle's own rules is even removing moral restraints, basically forcing the Iron Giant to lose that choice that defines him, because he will be analysed in the conclusion in the context of he chose to be a gun. He absolutely will be using his best weaponry and combat potential in the conclusion and even at points in the fight, because again, Death Battle also analyses characters at their best. And that's not a slight towards Death Battle and their rules. I understand why they are in place and why they are the way they are, but it just does not work for the Iron Giant. You cannot make a video where the subject is, could the Iron Giant kill this guy, or will the other guy kill the Iron Giant in a fight to the death, and not have the primary focus at the end of the day be on the Iron Giant's ability to be a gun. And there are some people who don't understand this, and I guess maybe it's a confusing thing for some, but the main point being made is that Death Battle by its nature is about the Iron Giant's capabilities as a war machine, while everything about the Iron Giant as a book, a film, and a character is about how that's not what he is just because he was made with that purpose in mind. Let him be happy, let him just be on his own, and you don't have to have them go berserk for the sake of the animation. Number 2. Okay, this one's kind of broad, but I see matchups like these all over the place, and I cannot overstate my hatred for them. Real animals. Just actual animals in death battle. Not even prehistoric creatures, not fantastical beasts, not cryptids, but actual animals. I absolutely despise the concept of putting a real-life animal into a death battle. Now, I think there are lines where, okay, sure, it can be fine. For the purposes of a gag, then it's okay. If it's intended to be subversive, because actually it's also including random myths made up about the animals, I suppose that's fine too. But when you completely unironically take a creature as gentle and loving as, for example, a gorilla, and put it into a fight to the death where you only focus on its abilities as a mindless killer, then you are doing something wrong. Plenty of predators in the world already have a very negative reputation as mindless killers. Lions, tigers, jaguars, cheetahs, hyenas, wolves, sharks, they are often given this stigma of just being bloodthirsty monsters who want to kill humans because they lack morality and are pure killing machines. As someone who loves nature, and has always loved nature, who has grown up with documentaries on how beautiful this world is, and has been exposed to just how amazing the life on Earth really is, I despise those stigmas more than almost anything, and putting these creatures into a scenario where the focus is just which one in a mindless fight to the death would kill the other, just unironically, no jokes, no gag, is against anything I'd ever want to see. These are beautiful creatures, they have a role in this world, and they all deserve to live even if humanity is progressively bringing them to the point of extinction, and nowadays forced into trying our hardest to delay the extinction that we're causing and bring numbers back up. And where the animation would not literally have animals killing each other, obviously, but I just do not want to see a simulated representation of a vicious battle between a mindless tiger and a mindless lion. Animal violence in the wild is fine to me, because that's how life is, but glorifying these creatures as bloodthirsty, mindless killers fighting to the death as a result of their natural bloodlust is disgusting. I cannot overstate how much I viscerally despise unironic versus matchups that use real animals in them. I have nothing more to say. If you cannot understand my problem from this alone, then there's really no way I think you'll ever be able to understand. Earth is a beautiful world, we shouldn't paint it in shades of red. Okay, number 1 is going to be probably the most controversial one, because I know this is a character heavily requested for Death Battle, and the Death Battle themselves want to use him, and I want to stress that I do not have any problem with people wanting him on Death Battle. But after reflection, I can say the character I want to see the least on Death Battle is Gilgamesh from the Fate series. I love Gilgamesh, but what I love about him is not the same as what most people love. Most fans of Fate have only really experienced Fate Stay Night and maybe the Fate Zero anime, and I'm not here to gatekeep and say that, oh, you haven't experienced Extra, Extella, and the Fate Grand Order game, you're not a real fan. I'm not here to do that, for people primarily think of just Fate Stay Night Gilgamesh when they think of the character, and to me personally, that is by far my least favorite incarnation of Gilgamesh in this series. I don't hate him, because he shares a lot of the same traits that make Gilgamesh so entertaining to watch. The arrogance, the haughtiness, the overwhelming presence and power behind him. But to me, what I love about Gilgamesh is who he is deeper than that. Despite his role as an antagonist at points, Gilgamesh is a hero. He's the first hero. He is the groundwork from which everything we consider kingly originates. Gilgamesh to me is quite a deep character with a lot of complex elements going into him, but due to Stay Night and general ignorance, he is commonly seen as purely an arrogant egomaniac who respects nobody and is borderline evil. That is not at all who Gilgamesh is. Yes, he's arrogant, yes, he's chaotic, but he's not evil. Morally, Gilgamesh kinda stands on his own. He is the judge of both good and evil in his eyes. His rule is the only rule. But he isn't evil by really any means, just because he doesn't listen to others and sees himself as the best. Even then, Gilgamesh has a softer, more subtle side to him. He's gentle towards children, for instance. He partakes in their games and spends time with them without causing them harm. He loves the heart of man as well. He loves the kind of humans who have goals and dreams that surpass what they could ever accomplish, but push towards it anyway, whether they're evil or not. Kirei Kotomine is quite evil, Artoria Pendragon is quite altruistic, and Iskandar the Great is kinda sitting in the middle, but he sees them all as individuals who have that kind of arrogance that he likes. In many ways, Gilgamesh can be said to simply love humanity itself. And Gilgamesh is not someone who will just have this massive ego and nothing else. He respects plenty of other people, and rarely is it because of their raw power. He respects Iskandar for his arrogance and his goals. He respects Ivan the Terrible for how far he pushed himself as a sovereign. He respects, though reprimands as well, Emperor Qin for how far he pushed himself as well when they were human. Really, the only character he might respect for their power alone is Kana, but even that is arguably because he sees Kana as the pinnacle of a hero for who he is and not just his raw power. But that's where I have issues with how I believe Gilgamesh will be handled in Death Battle, because most of the scenes, character traits, and depth that I love from Gilgamesh come from the likes of Fate Extra and Fate Grand Order. The only other time he has this level of depth to me is Fate Zero, which is popular and has plenty of great scenes like this, arguably most notably when he spares Waver's life because Waver was defiant against him and kept following Iskandar even after Iskandar's death. You know, because Iskandar was a king worthy of Gilgamesh's acknowledgement, and if Waver disrespected that by giving up, then Gilgamesh would have killed him without a thought. But the thing is, that's not what Gilgamesh is most well known for. Death Battle would most likely characterize him primarily as the arrogant dickhead he is in the Fate anime and the Unlimited Blade Work anime, which I completely understand because that's the most popular and well-known version of Gilgamesh. I know plenty of people who only know Gilgamesh as the golden bad guy who is endlessly arrogant and powerful. That's all they see in him and that's what they want in Death Battle. Sure, I get it. I see what the appeal is, but as someone who has Gilgamesh as his all-time favorite character in this franchise, and one of my favorite characters in all of video games, that isn't what I personally want to see. As far as I'm concerned, I believe Death Battle would have Gilgamesh show respect to his opponent for how powerful they are, leading to why he brings out Ea, rather than because he can see their heart and who they are. And I might even do this for his most popular opponent, Sinbad from Magi, even though Sinbad is drawing his power from gods, and thus he's the kind of guy Gilgamesh would not be pleased with in that regard. And honestly, due to how short Death Battle fights are, I don't think the battle is possible to write in a way where that respect or intrigue can be accurately conveyed. Which is just an issue with the show's general format of 3-minute animations, and not necessarily a problem with how they write. They have to work within their limitations after all, and I can understand that. Also, Gilgamesh's personality is heavily influenced by the time period he's summoned in. So if you're wondering why he acts kinda different outside of Stay Night, that's really the reason. His goals and the people in the world around him affect how he acts as the sovereign of all mankind. So in Fuyuki, he's particularly pissed off all the time and on much more of a nice edge trigger than normal. And I should stress that most of his matchups are against people who are way in the past, so if Gilgamesh was summoned then, he would not act like his Stay Night self, but that's how they portray him anyway because that's what's most popular. I also don't think I'd be particularly excited to see Gilgamesh portrayed as a shitty melee fighter in the animation because the Dean anime adaptation of the Fate Stay Night game and Fate Extella both exist, and show him kicking plenty of ass in melee. Anyway, that's kind of my piece on that. I understand why Death Battle would most likely portray Gilgamesh the way they will. It would simply make the most sense to characterize him from his most well-known incarnations and traits that the majority of people would recognize. But it's not what I personally want to see from Gilgamesh. Not shitting on anyone who wants to just see arrogant golden man shooting a ton of weapons and saying mongrel endlessly, but that doesn't appeal to me personally. And that's why the character I want on Death Battle the least is my favorite character in the Nasuverse, the King of Heroes and the Wedge of Heaven, Gilgamesh. Oh, that was that video. Can't wait to see how the comment section responds to this, huh? Yeah, again, no disrespect to anyone who wants to see these characters, in quotation marks with some of them, on Death Battle. That's perfectly acceptable and fine. You can have your opinion, and that's completely okay. Again, special thank you to Redrunner for joining and helping me out with this video in that segment he did. I don't know what else to say, but boy, that was a big one, and I wouldn't be surprised if I made some enemies by making this video, but hey, as I said, everyone's entitled to their opinion. You can want who you want for Death Battle, that's completely fine. I'm not here to stop you from wanting what you want. But I did want to share my opinion, and again, thank you to Redrunner for helping out. Yeah, I also wanted to avoid, I should put this in the rules, characters who I just don't think have good matchups. Because, like, I feel like that is not really a reason, that is a reason to not want to match up in Death Battle. Not so much not to want the specific character, you know? So, yeah, like, that's a different thing. Or maybe I did bring it up and I've just completely forgotten because I'm an idiot. You never know. My mouth is not in sync with my voice. But as you can see, you have my patrons scrolling by. This is probably the last time you'll see this before the start of the next Death Battle season. Thank you to all of them for supporting me. It is a massive help. I hope they and you enjoyed this video. And you can go support me on Patreon if you want, where you can gain access to the ability to make me say stupid things on our Patreon-only Discord, which, oh boy, let's see what I got this time. This time I actually let people know in advance.
My name is Optimus Prime, and this is Bumblebee. He's a friend from work, and our substitute teacher, was that meant to be your? I'm so confused.
The only flaw with Top Gun Maverick is that Bob kept his shirt on during the beach football scene. Otherwise, it is perfect in every way. I mean, I already posted a lot of things, so I guess some of those. What the fuck? is that meant to mean?
Sex can wait. We have some MatPat to watch.
Hey Wiz, want to hear my updated list on my top 10 waifus? It has changed a lot since the Screw Attack days. Now I don't have underage children on it.
Barry Allen.
It was me, Boomstick. I'm the dad that ran off with the milk, causing you to create an awful running gag on an internet show.
I don't even know how I'm supposed to say, oops, caught him eating mac and cheese from the microwave. I just wanted to put that in. I don't even know how I'd say that. David is the only person who's been funny in this quotes channel for the last month. Hey, let's do it, loser. Let's go. Pay up. I can say the whole Sonic for Hire episode one script one at a time. I'm totally willing to do that. I love Sonic for Hire. And at least aside from the newer season. I don't know if they did the second newer season. Like, the period where it started being called Hedgehog for Hire, I can go without. Yeah, okay, that was pretty unfunny. Bye, fuckers. Have a good one.